On July 19, 1864, Captain William F. Martindale of the 1st New York Cavalry rode up this path to the front entrance of Fountain Rock with 20 of his men. Today, this site is the pavilion at Morgan's Grove near Shepherdstown. Fountain Rock's owner, Colonel Alexander R. Butler, was away in Richmond as a member of the Confederate Congress. He was also the designer of the Confederacy's seal. His wife, coincidentally, was a cousin of Captain Martindale's superior, Major General David Hunter. She, too, was away. She was in Baltimore. The house was left to servants, her daughter, and 4 children. Martindale met her daughter, Mrs. Rezin Davis Shepherd, who was invalided and grieving the recent death of her husband in a Union wartime prison. Martindale showed her his written orders from General Hunter. She replied, "The orders I see are to burn the houses of Edmund Lee and Alexander Butler." Martindale replied, "That's so. This is not Colonel Butler's house, but is the property of my mother's, and therefore must not be destroyed, as you have not been instructed to burn her house." Martindale replied, "It's the Colonel's house, and that's enough for me." Mrs. Shepherd could already hear men in the house rifling the silver spoons and forks in the kitchen. Other men, with canteens of coal oil or kerosene, strapped to the saddles on their horses and led directly into the house, were stacking priceless parlor furniture in the middle of the living room and covering it with straw carried from the barn. All of Colonel Butler's invaluable book collection and manuscripts on the history of the region were piled into the pile. Some of his most important records were those on the experiments of inventor James Rumsey. Then the fire was lit. There was also the piano given to them by Mrs. Henry Butler, their grandmother. Young Helen Butler, who studied music, begged, along with her sisters, to Martindale for him to save their piano. Martindale had already found some wine in the kitchen by then. He said his orders were to burn everything under the roof. The straw and kerosene was ignited, and the flames crept up the tall walls and crumpled the roses on the upper balconies. The adjoining room from the living room was roaring in flames. The roof was ablaze, too. Then young Helen Butler calmly turned and went back into the house to her beloved piano. One last time, she played Charles Eliot's "Thy Will Be Done," finished playing the keys just as the flames were climbing too high and too close. Calmly, she closed the lid on her piano one more time and locked the consecrated instrument, leaving just in the nick of time. Flames devoured the family home, and Martindale's men galloped southeast toward their next target, Bedford, the home of the elderly Edmund Jennings Lee, a first cousin of Robert E. Lee. Mrs. Edmund Lee, or Henrietta Bettinger Lee, wrote of the conversation later with federal officers. They told her that 40 of Hunter's officers had been deprived of commands because they refused to take part in this war against women, children, and homes. Years later, long after the war had ended, General Hunter himself voiced his regret over this particular order. But what was done was done. 50 years later, the aging Helen Butler Pendleton recalled how the piano wire could be heard popping amid the cauldron of heat that consumed her childhood home. As she put it, in concord, as if in protest to the ill that had been done.